Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for Finding the Right Farm, Land Access 101. As I said, we've given this presentation a couple of times before, but never to just the larger public. And so we're really excited to bring this beginning land access educational event to everybody. And we have a super wide audience that registered for this event. I'm not sure how many of the different pieces are represented, but we had about 50% of the people from Illinois, but then also a smattering across the Midwest, and then even got one registration from India, which we weren't expecting Illinois FarmLink to go international, but it did for this. And then we also have people with a wide variety of farming experience. So about a third are at the beginning of their farming careers with 1 to 3 years of experience. But then we also have aspiring farmers and then people with 10 plus years of experience. And then we also had all types of land access situations. So folks that owned land, people that are leasing, cooperative land access arrangements, and then like backyard or community garden land access. And so I share that because I think it's important that we have designed this presentation with all of those things in mind. And even though land access is a really specific thing, specific to your state that you're in or your county, specific to the type of farming you're doing and your level of experience, there is just some general knowledge and basic tips that can be really helpful when you're embarking on the land access journey. So I think that there is something in this presentation for all of you. And then we wanted to start the slide or the presentation with this screenshot from the National Young Farmers Coalition's 2022 survey. And so for this survey, they recording. We got a little echo there. If everybody could just turn themselves on mute, I think we'll be good. Okay, so for this survey, they polled 10,000 farmers across the US to come up with the top barriers. And probably a big surprise to nobody here, but access to land is the very top challenge for all of those young farmers. And so we just share this to say that if you are struggling to find the right farm or struggling with your land access journey, you're not alone in that struggle. And the goal of our program is to hopefully help you be more successful in that land access journey.
All right, thank you, Jeannie. So we're going to get rolling with this slide. I want to say two things about this presentation. Number one, it's going to be kind of general in many ways. And that's partly because we think that it's often unusual to find a presentation about all the different aspects of finding land and stewarding land and keeping land. And so we want to give you an overview. So, and we're hoping that in the future, we're going to have some webinars and workshops that will tackle particular topics in great depth. That's one thing. And number two, we have this slide of a slot machine and on the right, some images of sort of really careful, thoughtful, systematic planning. And I put those up there because there are different ways of approaching anything, whether it's buying a car or looking for land. You can kind of take your chances and kind of see what happens. Like if someone gave you some generic tomato seeds, you could plant them in your garden. You might get some decent tomatoes. Maybe you don't. And we realized that different people have different approaches to whatever they do. We are sort of assuming, and our belief is that the more systematic you can be, the more methodical you can be, to whatever degree you feel comfortable with, will increase your odds of finding the right piece of land. In our land access work, we've heard a lot of stories about a lot of people with different kinds of land access. Some have been success stories and some have not been success stories. And in a number of cases, we've heard from people saying, "Ben, I wish we had talked to you before this, or we had thought about this before we bought this land or leased this land." And so we just want to encourage you to sort of take to heart what we offer and see what applies to you, and give the farmland search as much attention as you can, because it's so fundamental to your ability to farm. So I want to get started. Later on in the presentation, we're going to talk about a little bit more depth of what Illinois FarmLink is and how it can help you with your farmland search in Illinois. But let me just first say that we are a program of the Land Connection, which is a food and focused nonprofit in Champaign, Illinois, which is in the middle of Illinois. And we have a number of activities. We do farmer training, including holding of the Organic Grain Conference every year. We organize and take care of the Champaign Farmers Market. We expand market benefits so more people can afford healthy local food. We also even help families sort of learn how to use whole foods again and have happy family culture. What connects everything is that we really believe it's possible to have a food system that generates healthy food, success for farmers, like thriving rural communities and a thriving living environment. And we want to be part of that and contribute to that movement. So we have our funders as well. We're grateful to the Lumpkin Family Foundation, Food Land Opportunity, and USDA. So let's get started. So what you're going to encounter and experience from us in the next 90 plus minutes is kind of looking at the big picture, some of the big factors that influence what you're going to experience in your farmland search. We're going to actually kind of take you through some of the stages of land access and some things to think about during those stages, have some tips, and then we're also going to say more about how Illinois FarmLink can help you. So the big picture, let's just talk about the big picture. I'm going to start with number one factor. If you're in Illinois, the farm landscape has largely been shaped by corn and bean commodity farming. And for example, the average farm size in Illinois is 375 acres. And what's happened with commodity farming for the most part is that we've got bigger and bigger farms with bigger and bigger equipment. And so the implication for you, if you're growing on a smaller scale, is that there may be not as much land available for you with infrastructure, with a house, with fencing, because corn and soybean farming at a large scale doesn't necessarily need those things. And the other thing to think about is that for most landlords, most landowners, the kind of leases that they know are for corn and beans. So it's just important to realize that not only are there just a lot of corn and bean fields out there, but because that's the dominant form of agriculture, that's a lot of what's going to happen. That's going to shape the land and the leases and other things related to how people think about farmland. Another one is you're probably aware that a lot of people are investing in farmland, like Bill Gates, large institutions, many other people. And the reason why is that farmland is a scarce commodity. They're not making any more. It generally appreciates in value, and it also generates rent. So when you have a lot of people chasing a scarce commodity, that tends to lead to rising prices, and that's what's happened to farmland. So we've heard in some places in Illinois that the average price per acre can be up to like $20,000 now. I mean, that's very prime soil, great location, very easy to access, that kind of thing. We've also heard of rents going as high as $600 per acre. I mean, that's again, very exceptional situations, but you just have to be recognizing that that's the context we're in. And I include this not to depress anyone, but just to sort of say that as you think about farming, for many people, farming cannot supply all the income that they need for their family. And so when you think about your farmland search, you're probably going to want to think about, okay, how else can I, at least during my beginning stages, make money to support my farming habit, my farming hobby, or my farming enterprise that I eventually want to make my full-scale enterprise. So you need to think about that as well. And this is a map. I'm not sure. I didn't realize this until I started probably until the last 6 or 7 years, but this map shows through different colors to what degree the percentage of farmland is leased or owned. So the darker the color, the more land is leased. And as you can see, Illinois is pretty much a large-scale leasing state. In fact, Illinois has a larger percentage of leased land than any other state in the country. That doesn't mean you can't find land to buy, but it just means that there's a lot of leasing going on out there that you should be aware of, that maybe leasing might make sense for you. And here's another thing, a large percentage of farmland is going to be changing hands in the next 20 years. And that's mostly referencing families who maybe the mother and father are getting to their 60s and 70s. And before they pass, they have to figure out who's going to inherit that land for the next generation, or is it just going to be sold? There's a lot of older farmers who are holding onto their land who might not have a succession plan or might not know what they're going to do with it. That means that there could be a lot of land coming into the market, but the reason we have this tip of the iceberg illustration here is that a lot of land never gets to public listings, like your real estate listings. A lot of land is sometimes transferred within families. Sometimes it's transferred to a neighbor or sold to a neighbor without ever going into the real estate market. So that's actually a key fact you have to keep in mind when you're looking for land, is that if you just rely on listings and like public information, you're going to be missing a lot of opportunities.
Yeah, so that's the big context that we're looking at and that everybody's jumping into as you begin the land access journey. And that's how we like to think of it. We have this hiking picture here, and we've started to think of navigating the land access journey as a hiking, as like going on a hike or preparing for a hike. And next, we're going to sort of provide this trail map so that you all can begin to understand where you're at on the journey and then to better understand where you're going. So this is the trail map. And as we go through this presentation, we're going to dive into each of these steps more fully. And so the 5 steps that we've identified of the land access journey are prepare, search, secure, steward, and future planning. And so that first one, which anybody who has gone on a hike knows is crucial to being successful, is the preparation stage. So a big part of that preparation stage is the assessment of yourself and your skills and your experience. And like, depending on that, you might choose a 7-day backpacking trip with overnight stays, or you might realize that you're better off with just an afternoon walk through your local forest preserve. So land access is similar. And we've come up with this checklist as you're embarking on this preparations phase of the land access journey, so that you can think through all the different things that you need to do to prepare for land access. And so now we're going to go into each one of those things that you're going to do as you prepare.
So one of the things we encourage people to think about as they think about getting farmland is sort of where are you on your farm business journey? Are you aspiring? Are you just sort of starting to think about it, starting to plan it? If you've already been farming for a little bit, maybe working on a farm, maybe doing something in your parents' garden, are you sort of starting to reevaluate how you farm because you've already tested it and you realize you need to evolve? Maybe you've been farming for 10, 15 years and you just need to expand your operation. So think carefully about that. I think one of our biggest takeaways is that different kinds of land access methods might make sense at different stages. So the more you are on the right and you're established and you know exactly how you're farming, who your market is, where you want to be, how much land you need, the more it might make sense to really buy land and just lock it in and expand. If you're a beginning farmer and you're just starting to figure out what you like to grow and what there's a market for, it might make sense to sort of maybe use a community garden, maybe lease some land, maybe sublease from another farmer, and just get the lay of the land. So we are big believers in kind of finding the right match between your farming stage and the land access option. And we also are big believers in thinking about where you are financially and in a number of other areas. So for example, even before I talk about finances, look at number 3, which is skills. There are skills that, number one, you should know sort of like how skilled are you in farming and that kind of thing. But you may have skills that can actually help you in your land access journey. So for example, one of our former navigators, Jim, he had a background in construction and construction engineering. And so when they finally found a really good option. They found an option that was a foreclosure. And for most people, a foreclosure with a beaten down house that was barely livable would not be very attractive. But because of his construction skills, he was able to sort of essentially renovate it and fix it up at a fraction of a cost it would cost anyone else. So that's something to think about as sort of a creative way of getting the land you need. We really believe it might be worth having a financial checkup, just kind of checking in what your finances are, what that might allow you to do. Sometimes it can help to talk to someone and just sort of get a sense of what they think your situation is for either buying land or leasing land for a little bit longer. Sort of know what your credit rating is. So if you want to borrow money to buy land, and if your credit rating is not very good at the moment, you might want to improve that and lease land for a little while until you have a good enough credit score to really get a good mortgage. It's also really important to sort of, if you're going to buy land in particular, but even lease land, to have kind of a sense of your business. What kind of revenue can it generate? Are you going to have to work a side job? Just to kind of put all those factors together.
Yeah, and so for everybody that feels they fit into that aspiring farmer or 1 to 3 year beginning farmer phase, we would really encourage you to take advantage of the plethora of these sort of beginning farmer training programs that exist in Illinois. And actually, a lot of them are offered virtually too. So if you're out of the state, they also might be of use to you. But Angelic Organics hosts State Line Farm Beginnings, and so does FoodWorks. Angelic Organics is in Northern Illinois and FoodWorks Southern. And then the Land Connection also hosts a Farm Dreams workshop in collaboration with both of them. So we'll be sending out a big list of resources after this webinar, and information on those will be available there too. But these sorts of programs are really helpful for you to come up with a rough business plan, figure out how to communicate your farm stories, figure out what your farm dream might be. And they're filled with other people who are exploring those same things, other beginning farmers who you'll get to know. So this is a great opportunity to sort of do those things that Nathan just touched on. And then in addition to your sort of personal assessment, your financial assessment, then you'll move on to the farmland assessment. So what are the considerations that you need to think about for your farm property and what you're looking for? And yeah, we encourage you to write them down with this worksheet. That is the necessary, desirable, and optional worksheet. And this is a really useful way to split them into these sorts of 3 categories. And through doing that and writing them down, you might realize that there are things that felt that they were necessary that you later understand are desirable. I walked through this exercise thinking through, as a future dairy farmer, what would I want on my property, and what felt pretty necessary, I still think so, is like a milking parlor, which automatically then narrows down how many properties I'm going to be able to look at. But something that might be desirable is perimeter fencing, because maybe instead I could use temporary fencing while I put in perimeter fencing. And then something that's optional is that I would love like a babbling creek throughout the property, but I know that that's not necessary or desirable, really. So yeah, maybe to bring us back to all of you and the land that you're going to be looking for. And Matt, I see your question. You threw us a hard one right at the beginning, but we're going to get to it after I introduce this question. But if you all want to share in the chat, thinking about your farming experience and the land that you would be looking for, what are like 2 things that might be necessary, but challenging for you? And if you're in the group that already has land, what is something that you did not identify as necessary, but later on realized it was? So yeah, feel free to share those in the chat, and maybe then we can kind of talk about them. Everyone's shy tonight. Well, that's okay.
Let's ask Noah. Noah, what was something that was absolutely necessary for you when you were looking for land?
Yeah, I would say being really close to market was pretty important to me. Not only just for the ease of like delivering produce, but also to attract workers in the future. So I didn't want to be like an hour out and not be able to, have staff in the future. So that was a big one for me.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, so we've got somebody that needs a well that passes food safe standards for irrigating and washing produce. That is definitely a need. And yeah, and sort of this question of selecting land that needs clearing or amending versus land that is ready to go and properly zoned for agriculture. And so that's a great question. Like, is it necessary that the tillable land is available, or could you clear the land yourselves? And even Mari with the well, that's another question of necessary versus desirable. Like Noah, on your property, you ended up putting in a well. So maybe that falls into the desirable category. Yeah, and then we've got space for a workshop and a grow tunnel or greenhouses, as well as growing plots, and that's in a city. And so those things might be particularly necessary in that scenario where there's not as much opportunity to expand. So,
Yep.
Yeah, thank you all for sharing.
So another element of just sort of preparing for your search is to think about where you want to search. And this might actually relate in some ways to your thinking about what kind of farmland you need. So for example, Jeannie mentioned a dairy. And if you're looking for a place that has had dairy in the past or has had at least fencing for dairy or for cows, if you look for land in an area that's all row crops, all flat land that's all been converted to corn and soybeans, your odds of finding a place with old dairy farms is probably pretty limited. Whereas if you looked, for example, McHenry County in northern Illinois used to be the fourth most productive dairy county in the country. There are still farms and barns and things like that that are still out there. So that might shape where you want to search based on your farming. One of the other things we encourage people to think about is how big of a scale do you want to search? Your sort of first instinct might be, well, the broader my search zone, the easier it's going to be to find land. And it's in some ways it's true. If you're buying land, you can look at a lot of listings and maybe the right thing comes up. But we also believe that oftentimes finding those properties that are not available for public sale, but might still be out there, those often come more from like getting to know an area super well and people getting to know you and really getting to know a sense of like different parts of a county, for example, can be very different in terms of the well water quality or frankly, even the politics or the availability of local food markets. So there's a lot of things to consider, and we generally would encourage people to look, kind of narrow your focus a little bit. Maybe it's one county, maybe it's 2 or 3 counties at most, but that allows you, if it's a long search and you're looking for a specialized property, to really zone in and really focus in, and probably over time increase your odds because you're going to be better connected. Another thing we encourage people to think about is not just their farming needs, but their life and family needs. And of course, if you are single and have no significant others and really don't care where you live, then this is probably not a factor. But for a lot of people, they sometimes are married or they have family, they have a partner. They may have kids who need to go to school. They may have aging parents that they want to be close to. So we often encourage people to have a holistic thought about what area you want to live in and balance both your farming needs and your life and family needs. And if you can sort of put all those down on paper, then and start looking at different areas. Like, for example, I know people who say, I want to be within an hour of my parents. So you can draw a circle around and kind of focus in that area, and then maybe even start subdividing that area based on other factors like farming factors or where your spouse works or where your partner works. So we really believe in kind of balancing both those factors. One story that kind of illustrates that, there's a woman, a wife and a husband in central Illinois, and the wife was really into grazing, regenerative grazing. So she wanted to get as much property as she could to have a large rotational grazing system eventually down the road. So they were living in Champaign. They found a really great 80-acre property in Western Illinois, and she bought it and didn't really pay attention to the life and family needs component of this until her husband made her aware that living in a remote western part of Illinois, that with the closest town being about an hour away, with less than 200 people living there, wasn't going to work for him very much, because he was from London and he was used to a metropolis of 25 million people and having great theater and great restaurants and everything else. So keep that in mind, so you're not don't run into unexpected challenges from someone else in your family. And then also think about land access methods. And this might be a surprise slide for you, only because we're not immediately jumping into leases and ownership and purchasing, because there are actually a lot of other methods. They're not as common, they're not as frequently used, but it's useful to think about these broader categories of how you get land. So one category is you get ownership now. So obviously that could be a purchase, but it could also be a purchase with other people. It could be partial ownership. It could be lots of different things. It could be no ownership. It could be a lease, which gives you more rights than a license. There can also be ownership in the future. We actually have Kelly Larson from the Conservation Fund on the call, and through the Working Farms Fund program, they offer a lease to own package where they acquire the property and they will start leasing it to the farmer, with eventually there being a path for that farmer to buy the land when the time is right. So there are sort of other options as well. We're going to recommend in our list of resources a really great resource that kind of explains all these different options other than just the ones you're typically aware of. And when you're thinking about those options, think about a number of key factors. So for example, is it the best use of money? I bring that up only because if you're a beginning farmer and you are going into a kind of farm business where you're also going to have to buy a whole lot of equipment or dig that well or whatever else, and you only have so much money, you can only get so much credit, is buying land the best use of your credit? You got to think about that. Is it affordable? If you are still very early and don't have a lot of assets and don't want to take a lot of credit risk, maybe a lease is more affordable. There's just a lot of factors to think about. Don't just assume that a lease is good for you or a lease is bad. Think through all those factors. But of course, leasing and purchasing are the sort of the most sort of common approaches, and you're probably already aware of those. But I think we thought it would be fun if we asked you to sort of share some of the positives you think there are for leasing. And if you could just put those in the chat just real quickly, like let's just do it in 30 seconds. What are some benefits to leasing land versus purchasing?
Yeah, so as is often the first one, we've got flexibility to move on if it's not the right fit. It can cost less.
Yep.
You can switch, you're not bound to the land. Yeah. The land may be more prepared to start ASAP. It's more affordable.
Yep.
And you might only need it for a specified amount of time. All great points.
Those are great. Those are excellent. So let's take the other side of the story. What are the really good advantages of buying land? Assuming you can afford it, what are some really good advantages of buying land?
Oh yeah, and Kelly added a great one for leasing, which is you can get to know the area and the soils before you take the next step. And
Excellent.
yeah, now we've got some for purchasing, which is it's yours! Exclamation. You have security, control of the land, no restrictions, maybe on growing particular crops.
Mm.
Investment in changes are covered, stability, being able to grow longer term crops like perennial agroforestry.
Those are really good.
Yeah.
It's not always just real super straightforward. We put together this chart that kind of explores some of those. And I guess I want to share a few things, and then Jeannie, and Noah, if you have any other comments, that'd be great too. One of those is that we didn't even put in the chart is if you're a sustainable regenerative farmer and you start improving the soil, and if it's only a short-term lease, then you really aren't going to benefit. You're not going to fully enjoy the benefits of all that work that you do. So that's one consideration. On this chart, if you look at the first column, security, several things. Number one, we have seen some situations where leases are not as secure as you think they would be, or in some cases, the farmland owner can make things pretty difficult. I'm not saying all leases are like that, but that's a consideration. Purchase seems very secure, but again, we would caution people that banks will sometimes lend you more money than is really practical for your whole life and for your whole farm business. So be really thoughtful. If you get overextended with credit, that can actually be an insecure situation, both financially and even like psychologically. Equity. So equity is when you build up your assets that you can later use for retirement or for another purpose. We put no for the lease with an asterisk because, as someone else said, with the benefits of leasing, you can get it for a cheaper price. And if you get it cheap enough and then invest in other things, whether it's equipment or a mutual fund or a retirement plan, that's another way of actually addressing equity. And then finally, I want to talk about briefly collateral, which is third from the right. Collateral is when you want to borrow money. Typically, a bank will say, we want the potential right to take something else of yours if you don't pay that money back. So one of the best forms of collateral for banks is a home, because they could take it and then sell it on the market and get some money back. Purchasing actually, if you don't overextend yourself, can actually open yourself up to greater flexibility for borrowing other money. And then we also have that landlord help or hassles column. Purchasing, again, it's yours, and so you're responsible for the fixes, which could be a negative, but it's also yours, so that if you put all your time and energy into it, it's yours too. With a lease, you've got a wider spectrum. Landlords can be a super hassle if they make your life challenging, or they're not pleasant, or they really push you on elements of the lease that aren't fair. But we've also seen situations where leases can be awesome. Like someone also said during the discussion, they can make available infrastructure and equipment that you couldn't get by purchasing it yourself. And they can give you encouragement. They could just make life actually really helpful. So it's really a balancing act, and there's a lot of things to consider. And this one might have surprised you when we said, can you tell your story, and in terms of your preparation? And what we mean by that is can you explain who you are, why you farm, and also convey the fact that you're responsible and a good farmer, and will make things work? Because whether you're working with a lender, a realtor, potential landlord, those first impressions matter a lot. And if you can tell your story well, and maybe even have like a sheet of information about you, almost like a farming resume, that will show the potential landlord that you're really serious, and that's going to reassure them, especially if they don't know you already. And let me just give you an example. So here in this photo, We have Rosina on the right. Her family purchased the farmland behind her back in the 90s as an investment. And Rosina, their child, grew up to be an environmental advocate and activist. So she's begun to encourage her parents to change the stewardship of their land, and she wants to go organic. They talked to their current conventional farmer if he'd be willing to change, and he wasn't willing to do so. So they began looking for an organic farmer, and we were able to make a connection and introduce them to this farmer, Mark. And I have to tell you that I was there for the first conversation they ever had, and Mark was so good at telling his story. And it was clear, it was friendly, it wasn't boastful, it was just kind of matter of fact. He kind of explained why he was looking for more acreage. It wasn't really to make more money, it was to allow his college graduating son to kind of get into the business too. And he explained how he would farm differently than the conventional farmer. He even asked questions to the family, like in a real nice way of like just wanting to know more about them. It wasn't just about himself. And I think he really made a difference for them. And again, it was partly because he made a good impression, could tell his story, and just your ability to tell your story well is one of the most important assets you can bring to your farmland search. So at this point, we'd like to ask, are there any questions about the kind of the stage we just talked about and the preparation stage? For people who have already sort of gotten land, does the preparation stage make sense? Are there things you wish you would have prepared for more? If you've not been searching for land before, or you're just starting, are there any questions you have about this stage?
Nathan, there was a question earlier that sort of brings us back to the larger context. If we want to, the larger land access context, if we want to jump into that now. But Matt asked, with all of this land imminently changing hands in the near future, why is it so difficult to find for current farmers to why is it so difficult to find current farmers looking to hand over land to new farmers? So basically, with so much land transitioning, why is it hard to find land?
That is a great question. I would say part of it is, in most cases, if farm families can, they will want to try to transfer it within the family. And many current farmers, I think, struggle with what's more important, passing on the farming assets to their kids, if their kids don't farm, or is it more important to keep the land in farming and maybe the kids don't get the farmland, especially if they're not interested. So I think those are the two kind of the things that current farmers struggle with. I would say, again, if there's someone in the family who wants to farm, they'll do everything possible to help them farm, so it'll never come on the open market. If they do get to the point where, and this is a small minority, because to be very frank, there's a lot of farm families that never do a good plan. There are farm families that have a real privacy culture. So the mother and father will only, their kids will only find out what their mother and father wanted when they read the will, when the parents have passed. So there's a lot of kind of dysfunction sometimes in farm families that prevents really good planning. And again, I would say you're asking a really good question. The other challenge is that suppose there is no one in the family that wants to farm, and suppose the farmer wants the land to continue to be farmed and starts looking, they're most likely to sort of look through like networks of people they know already. And so that really makes it hard for someone coming from another area to even be in the conversation. There are interesting stories of how things have worked out well. I know one young man who wanted to get a start in corn and bean farming. He asked these older neighbors if he could lease a small amount of their land. They said yes. He thought that was the end of the story. After he leased their land for a year or two and they got to know him, they said, actually, you know what, we'd like to transfer this farm and this whole property to you because our kids aren't interested and we still want to see it farmed. So, but you can see where that was a longer process that never went through the farm listings and real estate. I hope that was helpful. I hope that was a helpful answer.
Yeah, and I would just add really quickly, Matt, there's a couple too, like almost like political pieces too, like Nathan shared Bill Gates owning so much farmland. And so that's almost like the financialization of farmland, like the cost becoming so exorbitantly high that it's just not attainable. And then the other thing would be, I think that we see is the infrastructure having been changed to support large scale farming, and then like housing, needing housing and trying to find land, and housing not being on small, you know, chunks of property anymore. So there's a lot of it. That's like a very, very multifaceted question that a lot of people are looking into right now. So great question.
It's a really good question.
Okay, and then we've got one from Oliver, which might be still going down this track, but would you all say it's accurate that local and federal government are making it easier for new small farmers to get their starts with assistance program?
Ooh.
I could jump in on this one with my own personal experience.
Thanks, Noah.
Yeah, so I'm down in Southern Illinois, and there's not a lot of folks doing, the kind of small scale vegetable farming that I'm doing. So for me to access, the FSA loans, I really had to break it down and try to explain it to the loan officer in a way that, would make sense to him. He was actually a former Monsanto employee. And so, I kind of sort of catered the message to him and explained what I was doing and how he'd hopefully get his money back. And he ended up supporting it, and we've developed a good relationship. But yeah, I think it's just you kind of got to keep pushing forward and asking, questions, continue the emailing, and yeah, figure out how to get that message across to them.
Yeah, well, thank you, Noah. I would just jump in. There are some government programs. You have to figure out how to access them. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later. There are actually so many that sometimes it can be a little bit challenging navigating them. We would encourage you to sort of find someone who's well connected with those programs. And we know some people in the farm credit system that we can recommend to you to sort of reach out to. However, I would say sometimes the government programs can also be more challenging to navigate. Sometimes they're complicated. Sometimes they take time. And if you're in a situation where you need to move quickly on a property, that can be a challenge. I think some of the best programs out there are programs that will help you fund the improvements to your land once you get it. Like NRCS has some really good programs along that line for wells and fencing and that kind of thing. So it's a good question. It's out there. You just have to figure out how to access it.
And then, yeah, if anybody else has questions on the prepare stage, feel free to add them. And if not, then we'll probably move into the search.
Yeah, so let's go on to the next stage, searching, which again, we advocate for sort of a thoughtful approach and considering a number of factors. And we're actually going to sort of talk about some of those, including ways you can search. Think about that. We're going to talk about the fact that there's more than just one way of searching, like through social media or through realtors or online listings. We really believe in the power of networks and connections to open up those opportunities that might not be on the surface, the public surface, using information, using data to kind of be efficient in your search, and also, frankly, kind of building some habits of like persistently kind of sticking at it. So let's talk about very briefly working with real estate agents. This doesn't apply so much to leasing, although you may still want to check in with real estate agents in an area where you want to lease because they are so well connected with so many landowners. But I'm mostly mentioning this because a lot of farmers do want to buy farmland at some point, and when they do, the real estate agent can be a key ally. We would say that you should sort of take your time in picking your real estate agent and consider some different factors. like how well do they know the rural areas of that area? We've run into some real estate agents who know urban and suburban properties really well, but they don't get farmland and they don't have those deep connections. And one of the best things about a well-connected realtor is that they can have close ties with families for decades, and they can sometimes know about a property that's coming to the market before it gets to the market, so you can be ready. But we've also seen realtors who like might not even be patient with a farmer. Like if you're really looking for just the right property, they might get impatient after a while and say, boy, I can sell 3 houses before I can get this farm taken care of. So I would really take your time, maybe interview several, maybe get some references from some other farmers who have found land, and just really make a smart choice, because that realtor can make your life extremely happy, or they can not help you as much as you wish they would. And here's another question. So if you're looking for land to purchase, let's just assume that everyone in this virtual room is trying to look for land purchase in a focus area that you picked out. What are some other ways of searching other than through Zillow or other online services, or through your realtor? How could you also find out about properties that might be coming on the market or might not even be on the market through listings? So if you could put those in the chat, that would be great.
Someone said word of mouth, driving through
Excellent.
the area you're interested in,
Yep.
an auction. Yep.
Yep.
Or an assessor's office,
It's good.
family and friends, community organizations. And you guys are hitting all of them.
Absolutely. That's really good. I would just add a few more: social media. Sometimes if you have a connection, I know that there are certain places, there are Facebook groups for particular communities and areas. So if you're really down to that granular of a level of searching, sometimes a Facebook group that you can get invited into can help. Craigslist sometimes can be a good approach. Farmers market managers, like they're the ones who talk to all the farmers and organize them, and maybe even are aware of farmers who might be retiring. They can be great sources of information. Village planners, city planners can also be aware of things that are happening. There's just a lot of options. So your search should just not have one or two options. It should have multiple ways you're going to search and kind of be persistent. I think, Noah, you're going to take it from here.
Yeah. So in our advising work, working with farmers and landowners, one thing we found is that folks that are more tied into their community and have a big network can often have a little bit of an easier time finding land. And this kind of harkens back to being able to share your story well. So if you're able to tell people, like what kind of farming you want to do, what drives you to farm, and then also what your land access needs are, then the people in your network can share that story a little further afield, and that's going to spread your message quite a bit further and increase the chances of you finding something that works for you. And if you don't currently live in the area you want to farm, I know we definitely would recommend that if at all possible, that you're able to kind of plug into that community first, whether that's by taking a job on a farm in that area, or just joining some of the groups that are local to that area and getting your message out. And this is actually a diagram showing the characters from Game of Thrones and how they're so interwoven and interconnected. And this kind of helps to keep in mind that you may only be, a couple connections away from that opportunity you're looking for. And so just because you don't see that right in front of you, don't give up hope. It might be just a few connections away.
Yeah, thanks, Noah. So this is another one. When I was looking for my first job, I ended up doing a lot of information interviews and a lot of different conversations and learning things. And it really helped to sort of like have a journal or a notebook to just kind of keep track of the things I was learning, people's contact information and what they said, just like a farmer would keep track of their succession plans and what they've put in the fields in a particular year, all those kinds of things. And I think it's an underrated aspect of land access, is to sort of really keep track of that diverse information. And I would especially highlight we were talking, as Noah was just talking about those connections in the community, like keep track. It sounds weird, but keep track of the people you get to know, and not just the advice that they give you and the help they give you, but also like what makes them tick. How can you help them, or what matters to them, so that when you follow up a second or a third time or a fourth time, you can share stuff and say, hey, how's your son doing who had the broken arm, or whatever else the case might be. We just really encourage you to be thoughtful about information, especially if your search is going to take a while. It can be really helpful to go back a year late, a year back, and sort of say, oh, who was that person I talked to who knew that farmer who did this? If you have it on paper or in a computer, that can be super helpful.
Yeah, and so one of the ways to help you evaluate and assess properties, once you find maybe a listing you like, or somebody's told you about a property, you can use these publicly available online data tools to kind of filter out maybe some of the properties that wouldn't work for you. We actually did a webinar on this past year, so if you're interested in learning more about how to use these tools specifically, definitely give that a look on our YouTube. But some of those tools include county GIS systems. GIS just stands for Geographic Information System, which is a jargony way of saying it's a map with data attached to it. So you can often find a county GIS site that will have zoning and tax information, might have land owner history, so you can see like who's owned it and when it was sold and purchased. And then you also can often measure areas and distances on the parcel you're looking at. We also go into how to use the web soil survey to access data. And there's like some pretty easy data to access on there, but then there's also some more complicated tools and more data to be accessed. So if you want some tips and tricks on that, definitely look at the webinar. And then we also touched on how to use the FEMA flood mapper, which shows whether your property's either in a regulatory floodway or nearby. And then we also touched on the ISGS's well mapper, which shows you if there is a well on the property, it'll show you what the production rate is of the well. So how many gallons per minute of water it produces, and also how deep it went, and then what geologic layers it's in. And if there's not a well on your property, you can also look at the surrounding wells and get a sense for maybe how far you'd have to dig. Obviously, this isn't, a substitute for going and having a soil test or having, an inspector come out, but it's a nice first assessment. So these are a great way to save you time, especially during the growing season while you're looking.
Great, thanks, Noah. And then we have this slide just to kind of make the point that if it ends up that your farmland search is going to be a little bit long because you're looking for a specialized property, or you're just busy, we really encourage folks to kind of build some like habits and routines, so that they're just like maybe running 3 times a week. Instead of running 3 times a week, you're looking for land and looking at listings and making contacts once every week on a particular day. And there's a great book called Atomic Habits by James Clear that kind of talks about not only how powerful habits are in terms of making progress over time towards a long-term goal, but also how to build them and how to develop them. And he's pretty powerful in inspiring in his story. He was a really standout baseball player in high school and got hit in the head by a baseball, and the doctor said, you're never going to play sports again. But through persistent habits of stretching and therapy and nutrition and all these different things, he eventually did play college baseball. He wasn't as good as he could have been, but that was such a powerful story for him that he's become sort of a spokesperson for how powerful habits are. And I've actually just this last year, I saw a farmer, a really good farmer, really not have a lot of time, or not make a lot of time to look for land during the summer, which is the growing season. And I know it's a crazy time, and you're working like crazy and you're exhausted. And in his case, he had a young baby, but he's now likely to find land. But it just occurred to me that if he could have just devoted like every Sunday or every Saturday, or 3 or 4 days, 3 or 4 hours a week on particular days, and just kept working his network, exploring, I think he could have been in a sort of safer situation.
Yeah, and so to share another farmer story, this is Beatrice from Multiple Harvests. She was farming with Urban Growers Collective in the city, and then this year moved to a rural property, which is in Will County, south of the city. And we share her story because maybe right now you're feeling a little, I don't know, overwhelmed or hopeless. Hopefully not. But Beatrice did look for land and worked with us for 3 years and worked with our program. And we held advising calls with her and helped her, I don't know, get the right documents in place and gain confidence in her farm story. And throughout the process, one of the biggest lessons that we've learned from her is that knowing when to pivot is huge in the land access journey. So Beatrice is also a traveling nurse. That's her other job in addition to farming. And then she is a Kenyan farmer who grows specialty African crops to sell to the African immigrant community. And so she has a very specific customer base. And because of that part-time job and because of her customer base, she was looking in McHenry County, which is north of the city. Also has a lot of small farms up there. It's a wonderful farming community. And because of that, though, the land is very expensive. And so she kept looking at properties. It was going to be too expensive, and went to many events up there, was doing all the things that we said to do up there. And then eventually her realtor, I believe it was, told her to start looking in Will County. And Will County is a little bit different because there is kind of a farming scene starting there, but it's very new. And so but because of that, the land is more affordable. And so then eventually, Beatrice knew that she had to pivot. There wasn't really any other choice. And maybe like going back to the necessary, desirable, optional thing, land in McHenry County seemed necessary and then sort of moved more to desirable. And she realized that she could make all of the other pieces work still in this different county. So.
Excellent. And we just wanted to sort of wrap up and just sort of share with this stage and just share some what we call land access hacks, sort of untraditional ways of thinking about land access that you might not have thought about. So we're going to just run through those. One is public land. We tend to assume that the only way to get land is through a private owner, whether leasing or buying. But there's a lot of publicly owned farmland in Illinois, in particular around Northeast Illinois. In this case, Cliff McConville of Allgrass Farms was able to get a lease for, I believe, about 160 acres of land. And he was able to get a five-year terms. And not only that, but the Forest Reserve renovated the exterior of the barn at a cost of, I think, close to $1 million. And of course, he had to also give them some things, their considerations, but there are opportunities sometimes to get land by leasing from public farmland owners. It can be both more stable, but also more challenging. In his case, if he wants to change something significant on the farm, he actually has to go in front of the county board and negotiate with the county board rather than just a staff person at the Forest Reserve. So there are some challenges, but that's one thing to think about.
Yeah, and we've seen actually quite a few folks access land through the for sale by owner process. This can be pretty common, particularly in rural areas, because it'll help save the seller the real estate commission, which can be between 3% and 6%. But we've heard some both really encouraging, easy, good stories, and also some more challenging stories. I actually personally bought my property through for sale by owner. And had a really good experience. Ended up building actually a pretty lasting relationship with the seller. He's actually my neighbor to the north. But I made him an offer and we worked together to close on the property. And I just was sure to communicate with him if when I hit any hiccups in the road, like securing funding from the bank, or the bank was taking a little bit of time to check the title and make sure there's no liens on it. So it ended up being a really good process for me. But we've heard of other stories where it can turn into a really long process. And sometimes there can even be some legal entanglements that gets a little messy. So definitely something to keep in mind. Without having the real estate agent there, there's not that buffer of personalities between seller and buyer. So make sure you're ready to be, a good communicator. And then also make sure that, you're going to bring in the right people to help you do your due diligence. Because you're going to want more eyes on the property, whether that be farming friends or inspectors, and that kind of thing. So just some things to keep in mind with for sale by owner.
Also wanted to share two stories of farmers in the kind of Northeast Illinois area who have done sort of a number of different things that are sort of not your standard approach. So Carolina on the left of Blacksmith Acres started out by getting multiple plots of a community garden to kind of just get going. These plots, by the way, were like an hour away from her house because that was the best she could do. And then she currently, the last 2 or 3 years, has been getting land access by subleasing from another farmer. So that's an interesting idea of subleasing for an existing farmer who might just have an extra acre or two and who might really understand farming really well and give you really nice terms. The folks on the right are Rachel and Jesse Smedberg of Tulip Tree Gardens in Will County. They primarily grow hemp. They had not been farmers, decided to become second career farmers. The first piece of land they decided to purchase was not actually financeable initially because of the condition of the buildings and the home, I think. So they start out with a land contract, which is essentially where they had an agreement with the owner where they would make a certain number of payments to the landowner himself. And then eventually, after I think it was 5 years or 3 years, they had to make a balloon payment, and then they would get the right to the property. This allowed Jesse, who was an engineer, to fix up the house so that eventually it would be financeable. And then, not to make the story too complicated, but they then partnered with Iroquois Valley, which is a real estate entity that buys farmland for organic farmers to farm that they can then lease and then buy eventually. So complicated, but obviously it's also really creative and flexible. So don't assume that just your typical lease or your typical purchase is the only way to go about things. And actually, we have Kelly, again, I mentioned Kelly Larson from the Conservation Fund and their Working Farms program. There are increasing numbers of entities like the Working Farms Fund that are doing really creative things around land access. Kelly could probably explain this better than me, but essentially they are trying to make it possible for diverse farmers in the greater Chicago area access land by purchasing the land that they're interested in, putting an easement on it, and also leasing it to them so that they can get the price, a better price, and they can acquire the land on a timetable that really works for them. Kelly, did I get that pretty well?
Yes, perfectly. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Oh, okay. Yes, we call it a buy, support, protect, sell model,
Yep.
which offers a patient pathway to land ownership. I can drop the link in the chat.
That'd be great.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. So we've known Sylvia for a while. I just can't tell you how happy she is that she's been able to partner with the Working Farms Fund and get land and on a timetable that works for them, but they can already begin working on it even before they can actually buy it. And then remember we talked about in the prepare stage, and we were talking about sort of knowing where you are with your farming skills and your finances and everything like that. Sometimes working on a farm can be a form of land access. I mean, it gets you into the farming world. In some cases, like Temple Farms Organics, if you work for them as their organic farmer, you're getting salary and benefits, which can be really helpful. And then if you have a lead farmer that you're working for, your growth rate of skills and knowledge can be really, really fast. And you're going to sort of probably avoid some of those mistakes that you might make in your own. So think about that. For example, I'll just share one other case. There's a hospital in Barrington that has hired a farm manager to manage their 20 acres of farmland so that they can eventually generate produce for their own hospital. He's not owning the farm, but he's getting a chance to farm and learn and do all that he wants to do. So let's have a brief pause here. Are there any other thoughts about the search process, the land access hacks, the different things we've talked about? I'd love to take any questions, or even if someone has a story about an interesting thing that happened to them in the search process. Actually, maybe how many people are actively searching right now? Is everyone on this call actively searching, or are there any people? Maybe everyone is everyone looking for land right now?
We have a couple no's and some not yet.
Yeah, cool.
Or passively searching.
Good. Awesome.
I think one thing that stuck out to me about something somebody said for pros and cons of leasing, and I think just something to emphasize from that phase is that there are so many creative options for accessing land, and talking to people who have talked to a lot of farmers about how they access land might help you think of new ways. Like somebody said, for long-term crops, purchasing would be your option. But like Nathan has a great example of a lease that was written for agroforestry for long-term crops on leased land. So there's people are figuring out all sorts of ways to do all kinds of different things with access.
That's a great point, Jeannie. I would build on that and say one of the things we haven't mentioned so far is that our program offers free advising. You can just get in touch with us and we'd be happy to talk to you on the phone or meet you if you're close by. And we are kind of aware of all these different options and resources and organizations doing cool things like the Conservation Fund, and we can help you make those connections. So you really you shouldn't have to do the FarmLink farmland access program journey on your own. We're here to help you. All right, should we jump into the next one?
Do it.
So let me just start by just saying something about this next stage. We've actually kind of, I guess, kind of arbitrarily separated searching from securing. The way we think about this is that you're searching for a property that looks pretty promising, and that can take some time. But just because a property looks like it meets many of your needs on the surface doesn't mean it's actually the great deal. And my dad used to say, never praise the day before the evening. So never praise a farmland before you've actually checked it out and really made sure it's a good arrangement, both financially and every other way. So we're going to say a little bit about sort of really kind of kicking the tires and making sure it's a good arrangement, good deal.
Yeah, so this due diligence stage is really important. This is where you're going to double check your needs and make sure that you've thought of everything that you're going to need in your farming operation and whether this property might check those. We'll talk about the due diligence stage in the next slide. And then Nathan will talk about building good leases and lease negotiations. So yeah, you find this dream property and you're head over heels for it. It's really easy to kind of let the practical, reasonable side of your brain fall to the wayside a little bit. But this is the stage where it's really important to really do your due diligence. Make sure that it really checks your needs, and definitely bring in people to help you do that due diligence. So that might be an inspector for buildings and infrastructure. That might be getting a water test of the well. That most definitely means getting a soil test, maybe bringing another farmer out to kind of give you a second opinion, a second look. And then I would definitely recommend trying to talk to the neighbors and the landowner if you can, and see what that land looks like in different seasons. Are there low spots that maybe hold some water that wouldn't be good for farming? You know, does the drainage overflow when you get a couple inches of rain? That kind of thing, you know, can make a big difference in your first couple seasons. And you can, you know, kind of get ahead of that by talking to the local folks. Next slide, Nathan. Yeah, so if you're not from a rural area and you're from the city, there are some things that might kind of slip under your radar you wouldn't have experience with. So that photo on the left shows part of a septic system, and this is something you definitely want to keep an eye out for. You'd want to ask that this has been cleaned out recently, that they haven't had any problems, because that can be an expensive hassle if you have to do septic work. And then that top right photo, it's a little bit hard to make out, but you can see there's actually a bit of a berm in the center of that photo. And that might clue you in that there's some water issues that they've been trying to divert. And so that would be something good to ask. And then on the bottom right there, it might be hard to make out, but those leaves are actually curling. And that can be a sign of agricultural chemical drift from nearby farms. And so that could be a huge problem if you're trying to be certified organic. You might have a hard time getting certified. So these are just a couple examples of things that you might just not be aware of if you haven't gone through this process before. So always a good idea to bring other folks in, maybe who have a little bit more experience, and ask as many questions as possible.
No, actually, in case there's someone on the call who hasn't had experience with a septic field, can you briefly explain how those work?
Yeah, absolutely. So a septic system is just a way for a household to get rid of its waste. And generally, I think there's 3 to 5 long tubes that go out after this holding tank, and they'll slowly leach out that wastewater into the soil, and it'll percolate down. But those can get clogged, and they do need to be maintenanced every couple of years. So it's important to check that maintenance has been done, because otherwise you can have quite a problem on your hands.
Yep. Yes, so I would really second the idea of checking out the property really carefully. One story of a woman who wanted to cut flowers, and she was looking in the Gurnee area up in northern Illinois, and the farmer who had farmed it the previous year was the person representing the landowner, and he was saying, "Hey, this is pretty good land. You're gonna do fine." So she kind of trusted him since he was a fellow farmer. And then the next year she's farming, and it was just a moderate rain for the first time, and a half acre of her flowers were flooded out because the land was actually lower and held the water and was just kind of wet. So it's interesting. Jeannie had been talking about Beatrice earlier, and Beatrice visited that property several times, including once when it was raining, I believe, just to sort of understand how the rain and the water acted on that piece of property. So that's one consideration. Another consideration is zoning. I think that was brought up before. Every county is different. And then if you're within a municipality, then you want to check out their zoning, because that can supersede the county zoning. So for example, different counties, for example, with agritourism, I know for ag zoning, depending on the size of the property in some places, that may determine how large of an agritourism operation you can have. So if you're thinking about agritourism as being part of your farm operation, you want to make sure you understand what the zoning implications are for your ideas before you buy land and find out you get a neighbor calling on you the first time you do a party or a barn dance, and that would be a big disappointment. And then again, if you're looking for a lease and you find a good property and the landowner seems pretty nice, you're still not all the way home. And you really need to sort of make sure that the lease itself is good. We definitely recommend leases. Illinois law allows for there to be oral leases, and in more rural areas, oral leases are actually fairly common. But we believe that they can actually be super helpful in a number of ways. And one of those ways is that it actually protects the relationship, so that if you're 2 or 3 years into it and something comes up, it's not my word against your word. You can just go back into the document and say, guess what? That's what the lease says. We should stick to that. And if it doesn't address it, then typically a good lease will have an arrangement where you can then negotiate or modify or have an amendment to sort of incorporate that additional sort of factor or sort of address that issue. We're hoping to do a specific webinar just on leasing, because it really needs a lot of attention. But the most fundamental thing we would say is there are some really good resources that lay out a number of questions that you and the landlord should work through just in common language, just get your understanding in common language of how you're going to deal with, for example, what property are you using? How much you're paying? When are you paying for it? Who's responsible for fixing things? Just get it out in basic English. And then ideally, you'd have a lawyer look at it and sort of make sure it's tightened up. But before you even go to the lawyer, just sort of work through those questions. We also really encourage you to take your time. Especially if it's a complicated farming arrangement. We've seen it take multiple meetings, and I think that's actually good. Sometimes some of those things can be complex, and if you try to do too many complex discussions in one meeting, you just kind of get worn out. And worn out people don't always make the best decisions. And make sure it's the right lease for you. I mean, ideally, if you know what your necessary items are, what you absolutely need for your operation, make sure it works for you. And a lot of farmers in the sort of small, local, sustainable food world are really nice people. And we tend to sometimes not protect our boundaries. So make sure you protect your boundaries. And just to sort of kind of bring you into some of the lease type lingo. So there's the cash lease, which is just a set amount of money each year. Sometimes it's paid half in the beginning of the spring and some in the fall. Sometimes it's just one payment. There's the crop share lease, which is essentially where the farmer and landowner are splitting the expenses of the farming operation. And then they're also splitting in some percentage, could be 40-60, it could be 50-50. They're sharing the yields. And in some cases, the landowner actually will take possession of the crops and sell them themselves. In other situations, they just split the revenue that's generated. So that's kind of interesting. And then there's the kind of in between, which is the flex lease, which kind of, it has a base rent. So if the going rent rate in a county was $200 an acre, the base rent might be $100 an acre. But then if the farmer generates a certain amount of revenue, he would then share a certain percentage of that with the landlord as well. So if the farmer did well that year, the landlord would actually maybe make more money. If the farmer doesn't do well, then the landlord makes a little bit less money. So they're both sharing the risks. Finally, the key things in leases, make sure you know responsibilities and also pay attention to the risk. So for example, if you had an irrigation system and the lease said that if the irrigation breaks, it's the farmer's responsibility to fix it, that's a big risk. You don't know how much it's going to cost, and that could completely mess up your year. So be really attentive to those factors. It's funny, we sometimes do these webinars and people will say, well, I'm looking at 40 acres in this county, how much should I pay? And it's complicated because it depends on exactly where you are, what the soils are. Is it just land? Is there infrastructure? There's a whole bunch of factors that have to be considered. And you just have to really, and sometimes, frankly, landlords just want to enable a young farmer to get a start, and they're going to disregard all that and just give you a really good deal. So don't expect an easy answer to pricing. We're happy to kind of help you think that through. And finally, one of the reasons we also believe in kind of working on a lease is that if you just have an oral agreement that's kind of fast and loose, you really haven't gotten to know the landowner very well. And if you do a good lease negotiation, maybe over several meetings, and frankly, we often encourage you to do the lease conversations in the morning. That's when generally people are the most fresh and clear-headed. You're going to quickly find out something about that landowner. Is the landowner fair? Are they flexible? What do they really care about? Can you have a hard conversation with them without feeling personal? And if it doesn't feel right, even if you get an agreement that seems decent on the surface, but if the process has been gnarly and unpleasant and kind of harsh, that might be a real clear signal that that's not a good arrangement. And we really encourage people to sort of walk away. If you have some serious doubts, probably better to walk away rather than putting a lot of time and energy into a property. Any questions on that, the sort of that due diligence, securing stage of just sort of getting the right lease, making sure you get the right property? Does anyone have any stories that might highlight how important it is to do that due diligence? All right, maybe not.
It's okay. We can go into this next
Yep.
phase, which is our second to last one. And this is our steward phase. And particularly this is useful in the leasing situation, but I think that it's useful in the purchasing one as well, or really in any of them, because in a cooperative land arrangement, you need to steward the relationships. Noah talked about, even though he has purchased his land, he is still friends with his landowner. And so I think we all know that farming is built on relationships, and it's important to steward those relationships. And so, yeah, we put some information here about building trust and connection with landowners. The first one is figuring out what is their why. And there's plenty of different reasons why people might be fueled to be leasing or selling their land to a beginning farmer. And so it might be like an environmental purpose. It might be that they want to preserve a space that was really important to their family and there's a lot of memories there, or they might be just interested in the money. And so figuring out what their why is will help you cater things to them and build a better relationship with them. Listening is huge. Obviously, active listening as you're building a relationship with them and figuring out and learning things about them is necessary. And then we've got the when, where, and how, which is sort of like Nathan talked about, communicating in the morning versus calling them at 8:30 at night. I think, yeah, and this slide highlights that as well. It's particularly useful to note that most of the landowners that we're talking about are going to be elderly people. And so there could be specifics in how you communicate with them. So maybe they don't have a cell phone, and so text messaging isn't going to work, and maybe they're not great with their email either. I mean, I live with my 85-year-old granddad, and we were like cutting things out the other day to paste on a piece of paper, taking a picture with them and emailing them. It was like this whole thing that didn't need to be that complicated. So phone calls are probably going to be best. Written letters are probably going to be best. And like going back to what is their why, if it's environmental, for example, maybe they're trying to increase natural habitat, and then you're out there farming and you see a type of hawk that hasn't been seen in the area for a long time, and you take a picture of it and send it to them. That could be, a really great way to show that you're grateful for them, you appreciate them, and build and continue to build that relationship.
Yeah, just as by way of explanation, at the bottom right corner is a turkey. And the reason we included that is that I was talking to a farmer at a event, and he was talking about how he relates with his landowners that he rents from. And he said that his family and his family farm, they raised a few turkeys every year. And in addition to the rent payment to their landlords, they also give them a Thanksgiving turkey every year, just as sort of an extra bonus, just to show their appreciation. So never underestimate the importance of like just a warm gesture. And again, there's such a range of farmer landowner relationships. I just can't emphasize that enough. And there can be great ones and there can be challenging ones. And this is an example of a great one. The person on the left is Will Glazik. He's an organic grain farmer in central Illinois. The woman on the right is Jackie Davis, one of his landlords. She was looking for land, or actually she was looking for a farmer when she inherited her family's land. She was in the medical field for a long time. She cared a lot about health and soil health. When her nephew wouldn't change his farming methods, she said, I need to find someone who will farm my land in a way that really fits with my values. And so she looked for a while. And so she eventually did find, she went to a conference, speaking of places where to make connections. and she actually just heard him using the word cover crops in another group. And she said, I got to talk to him. And so they talked, and they do a crop share lease. So she's kind of sharing in the farming decisions. She's excited about it. They're like, it's just an amazing, good relationship. Not everyone's going to be like that. Sometimes it's just a business-like arrangement, but it can be really, really quite good. Any questions about the stewarding? Has anyone had any experience with landlords or anything like that? Not sure if anyone wants to share a story or share a question. All right, I think I'm going to go ahead. Is that okay, Jeannie?
Yeah, that's great.
By the way, you guys have all been great. It's hard to sit still for an hour and a half or more on a Thursday evening. We also want to encourage folks to think ahead. Like, again, you get a piece of property, you've gone through the securing, you've checked it out, it's a good thing, you've worked out either a lease or a purchase. Don't stop thinking about land. If you're leasing the land and you know that it's not going to be your long-term home for your farm, don't hit the snooze button on your farmland needs, especially if you've got only a year or two left in your lease. Start thinking ahead, build those habits of searching and building new networks and thinking about it. And if you do buy the land and you think this is going to be your long-term farm for you and your family, do yourself and your family the favor of really being thoughtful about what's going to happen to the farmland when you pass. And there's some really great resources about planning, which is often called succession planning. Who's going to succeed you in farming? A badly done plan can really cause chaos and ill will among your heirs or your family. Well done will plus like actively building a culture in your family of thinking about land and talking about why it matters and how important it is for the land to continue to be farmed or whatever else. That combination of a good system and building a good family culture around your property will really pay off, and you'll feel really good about it.
Yeah, so just to review one more time, our trail map, we have the 5 steps: the prepare, search, secure, steward, and future planning. So we just encourage you to remember the framework, think about where you're at, work the system, keep good notes, all of that.
So we're going to jump in. We're almost at the end. We're going to just share some more tips that we kind of want to share based on a lot of experience in talking with a lot of farmers and landowners, and then tell you more about Illinois FarmLink and how we can help you and through our FarmLink program and advising, because really a lot of this is general, and we want to be able to dive in and just, whether you're an aspiring farmer or you're further along, just jump in and help. So land access tip number 1 is plan ahead. In other words, the other way of saying this would be assume that your land search is going to take time. If you assume that, you're probably going to be safe and you'll really have success, because you'll be able to pick the best option, maybe go through a negotiation and have it fall through, but you're still going to have time to make it work. The person pictured here is Greta Winkelbauer. She was at an incubator farm in Grays Lake, and she was starting to really get interested in dairy goats, and she wanted to find a property that would be able to be converted to a goat dairy, which meant she needed to have certain infrastructure and be still within an hour and a half of Chicago. It literally took her 4 years of looking at listings every day before they were able to find this property in the Pecatonica area, which is just near Rockford. So the case of Cliff McConville, it took him 18 months to negotiate something with King County. It will take time. So if you're just thinking about your farm career or thinking about your next step and it might be 2 years away, great job thinking about that and keep planning ahead. Number two, expect those challenges and setbacks. It's rare for things just to go straight from you're searching to you find the perfect property and you're done. It does happen. I think it happened to you, Noah, but it doesn't always happen. I'll just tell you one other story along those lines. Jim, who I mentioned before, he and his family found a property in McHenry County that looked really perfect, really reasonable price, good land. Everything just looked like it was going to add up to be a great situation. They signed a sales contract. They had the inspector come in. The inspector said, Jim, you got a problem. The electrical wiring is a complete mess. It's not going to meet code. You need to just redo everything. It's going to be probably $50,000, $70,000. And Jim was like, no, I can't do that. So expect sometimes those hidden surprises that you weren't expecting. This one might be a weird one to include. We like to call this mastering money. So whether it's your farm finances or your personal finances, the better able you are to sort of get a maximum amount of value out of the money you have, the better. And so Fearless Farm Finances is a great book about farm finances and how to understand those. Your Money in Your Life is a great book about sort of thinking about your purchases and what really makes sense. Secrets of the Millionaire Mind is a very interesting book. It really is sort of saying, don't just try to save money, think creatively about how you can use money to sort of grow your wealth and your success. I think a lot of us, I know for myself, grew up with a family culture of frugality, and that's good to a degree, but that can also keep you from really seeing opportunities to really grow and be really successful. And then in the bottom right is NRCS. There was a great question before about government support for funding. Make sure you get out there and find some good resources about the government funding that's available for purchasing, for investing your land, for loans, for operations, and that kind of thing. Really highly encourage you to sort of seek help from others. It's just really impossible to know everything about farmland and buildings and location and resources. Talk to people who can help you, whether it's to analyze the soils, figure out what kind of infrastructure you need, just a lot of things. And oftentimes in the rush of getting excited about a property, you can overlook things that a more calm mind might see. And so that can be super helpful to do. And then be flexible. As Jeannie mentioned, Beatrice ended up being flexible. She had locked in for a while in McHenry County for a good reason, but it just wasn't working. She pivoted and found a property in Will County that didn't have the infrastructure she wanted necessarily, but it was inexpensive enough that she's going to be able to get NRCS funding and other funding to put in what she needs to make it a successful farm.
Yeah, and so the very last thing, which is our program, Illinois FarmLink, and how we can help in your land access journey. And then after this, we'll take questions. Mari, I see you asked a really great one in the chat. And so we laid out those 5 steps, and I think it's important to emphasize that we can help at every stage of the land access journey that you're in. Whether or not we know exactly what you're looking for, we'll do our best to connect you to resources or other organizations or other people that are working through a similar thing. And we do that through a couple different ways that we wanted to highlight real quick and how our system works. And so this is our website, Illinois FarmLink. And one piece of our website is the profile system. And so it's sort of like a database of landowners who are looking for a farmer and then farm seekers who are looking for land. And it can fit into any of those buckets that we've talked about: partnership, leasing, purchasing, however. And so when you go to our website, you see that big square red button in the upper right corner, which is create your profile. And you'll go in there and answer questions, hopefully with a lot of detail so that landowners can easily find you, but just about how much tillable land you're looking for, a brief like summary of your plans and your business plan, what type of farming you want to do, all of those sorts of good things, which also makes it a great step, I feel like, in analyzing all of those things. If you haven't done them before, I think it'll help you do that. And then a navigator, I'm for the northern region, Noah's for the southern, and Erica is for the central. We'll reach out to you, and if we need to do an advising call, we'll do that, or we'll post your profile to the website, and then it'll be public for landowners who come to the site to view it. So that's our profile system and how that works. And then, as Nathan mentioned, there's a couple of things that you can also do now. You can go to the website and see it. You can call or email us to set up an advising call. They're free calls. We love to chat with everybody and chat through your situation. We're all land access geeks, and we'll just talk to you and help get you set up on the right path. We send out a monthly newsletter with farmland access tips. If you're maybe seeking land, there might be a story about you in there, news, FarmLink updates, all sorts of stuff like that. So you can sign up for that at the bottom of our website. And then we just want to encourage you to tell others about us. This system works, like the profile system works, and land access works, as we've said so many times, through connection, and sort of through, I mean, if we have 0 farmers on the site and a landowner comes and they see no farmers, then they're going to think, oh, there's nobody looking for land, which we know is not the case. So, encourage other people to come to us.
Jeannie, I'll just jump in and sort of say, we really encourage you to sign up for the free monthly newsletter, because we do offer other education programs like this, and we also let you know about other education programs that we're not doing that would be super helpful. So it's a great way of just sort of knowing what kind of resources are out there on a regular basis.
Yeah, and so here are emails. As we said, we'll send out an email tomorrow with a document with all of the resources we recommend, and then next week we'll send out the recording of this webinar and the slides and everything. So I think that's it. I don't know, Nathan and Noah, if you want to add anything. If not, there's 2 questions in the chat.
Okay, I'm going to stop the share.
Great.
All right, if people want to show their video, you're welcome to. You don't have to, but we're happy to take some questions and just have a little conversation and hear some more about your farm searches.
So yeah, one question that Mari had was, it's sort of a lengthy one, but it is a good one. I have known a few retiring farmers who want to lease their land but still want to live on the property. This has made it prohibitive for beginning farmers to access the land. Any ideas about how to balance needs of retiring farmers with beginning farmers in leasing arrangements?
I don't have an easy answer for that one. I would love to know where are you looking? I'd love to hear more about that. If you want to just explain your situation a little more, that'd be helpful. Uh-oh, are we frozen?
I think she might be frozen.
So I guess my one thought might be, if you're in an area where there's Mari, can you speak now?
Oh, now I'm not getting any sound. Sorry.
So while you're trying to get sound, I'm just going to say, number 1, you may just have to keep searching, unfortunately. And number 2, if there was a town or city nearby where you could, I hate to say it, be in an apartment or something, that doesn't sound ideal. That's just a tough situation. But if can you say more? Is it Mari? Were you the one asking the question? can we get sound from you?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, okay, great. So, I am farming in eastern Iowa in the Cedar Rapids area. And I am kind of in a very short-term leasing agreement right now and looking for a more long-term situation. And
Mhm.
I have some other farmers in my network who are in a similar situation as I am. And it's been difficult because oftentimes the farms that have the best kind of infrastructure for sustainable vegetable farms, the farmer is really connected to the land, and as they retire, they want to live there. And so it's not conducive to a good long-term
Yep.
like leasing situation for farmers who are
Yep.
kind of done with the like short-term stuff and ready to kind of find their forever home. So that's been a challenge that I've seen other people and myself kind of dealing with.
Yep. I think I saw a chat, someone was suggesting, could you build a tiny house on the property? That's an interesting question. I know, I will say one thing. You need to definitely check the zoning on that even before you suggest it. I know that one farmer we know started running utility lines to a place where he's gonna have a tiny house, and a neighbor saw it and called the county, and the county put the hammer down saying, you can't do that. You can't bring a tiny house onto the property. But I love the idea. Jeannie,
Yeah.
Jeannie or Noah, do you have any good ideas?
I want to look at some of the resources we have and then can get back to you, but it's a great question because figuring out how to build those arrangements in that interim time can also be a really good time to set up like a lease to own situation, similar to what we said, like if they don't need all of the money right away, like we've seen that before. There was another example with a retiring farmer, but on that property, I think that they had like the good setup of two homes, and so it worked really well. So I don't know. Good question. And I like the idea of like partnering and working with the retiring farmer, but I don't have an answer right now.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. And then we had a question from Matthew about, do you have anything for Hoosiers, which I'm assuming is Matthew, you're probably from Indiana.
I'm actually going to be giving a talk about farm linking programs to this community of practice or community of organizations and farmers in Indiana who are trying to get some sort of farm link program going there. I'll be doing that next week. So I'd be happy to connect you to their organizer. I know there are several. Okay, great. If you could just send an email to us, to Jeannie, or do you need an email address? Should I put that back up, or do you remember?
Isn't it just her name plus
Yeah.
the
Landconnection.org. Yep.
Yeah, I'll share it in the chat.
Yep. Bingo. Yeah, we'd be happy to connect you with her. I think something's coming together. They have multiple nonprofits, land trusts, farmers, Farm Bureau, NRCS, all kinds of entities saying we need to have something like that for Indiana. So that's going to happen, I think. Anything else?
Okay, thank you.
Oh, sure. Actually, I think we actually have time. Would everyone like to briefly, I guess, say anything about anything that they learned from this talk, or something that they just want to share about what they're doing with land access? We just have a little bit of time. It's always sometimes nice to hear people's personal stories. I know, Mari, I think we have a sense of what's happening with you. Anybody else want to share something about, like Matthew, what kind of thing you're looking for in Indiana?
Well, so I would like to do something more long term and definitely conservation work type stuff. But I'm currently not ready because I'm still a college student and I don't have much in the way of financial resources. But I still definitely love to learn and love to prepare for things. So this has been great for me. I mean, I I wasn't raised on a farm, neither was my parents, but farming's in my ancestry. Almost all my grandparents actually grew up on farms, and to me, it's kind of like recapturing and reclaiming a heritage to me.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that, Matthew.
You're welcome.
Oliver, do you want to share a little bit more about the question that you just asked? I'm not sure if I understand exactly what you're looking for. If you want to just come off of mute.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you guys. Yeah, thank you guys for doing this. First of all, this has been a fantastic resource. I appreciate the access you guys are all giving us. But yeah, it's kind of funny. My partner and I had been discussing that exact thing that had been brought up a little earlier. Sort of both of us have regular full-time jobs right now. This planning stage that we're in right now is sort of pretty early on. But I have been trying to float the idea of, well, picking up additional employment, or if that means sort of maybe taking on a part-time role at my current job, or transitioning into a little bit more of doing a job that I want to be doing. So I guess in a roundabout way, I'm just trying to find if is there I'm not, I guess, like a specific, like almost classifieds area for the producers or farmers that are looking for labor, part-time labor or other full-time labor, all in efforts to sort of just kind of continue to get my hands dirty, and do more sort of, I guess, on the job training and on the job learning, whether that be volunteering or for profit. Yeah.
Great question. First of all, can you just say where you like to farm, or where are you?
So I'm in southwest side of Chicago. I'm in the Palos area, Palos Heights, currently. My partner and I, we're looking long term. We're both sort of in a scenario where we would happily leave our current jobs and start on this dream. But that's the other thing with the planning part of things. We're looking, it could be right around here in Southern Cook or towards Will County, but we've also kind of been floating the ideas around to ourselves and our families about looking at like Northwest Indiana, Northeast Indiana, Southwest Michigan. So I guess in the meantime, looking for opportunities around here in Southwestern Cook, or nearby Will County, any of those areas.
So I think all three of our teams are gonna take a crack at that question. I'll take the first one, then Jeannie and Noah can chime in. I would say number one, there's a huge labor shortage in farming right now. So
Okay.
I mean they're huge, and I visited a regenerative grazing, holistic grazing, grass-fed grazing farm, and they are having so much trouble finding people who want to farm, and then also kind of really, if they are farming, they really get it. And so I think there are farms out there looking for that. So I would start, like, frankly, like Googling farms in your area and contacting them directly.
Okay.
Especially if you know what kind of farming you want to do. As far as I know, I'm not sure if there's a farmer newsletter that would connect you, but I know the Land Connection has a classifieds section on our website where you can kind of look at farm classifieds for labor. I don't know if there's a lot, but I would say, again, the general context is farmers are definitely looking for people who are really interested and committed, who won't drop out after a week, but they would definitely be interested. Jeannie, you want to go next, and then Noah?
Sure, yeah. And we can send these resources, but there is like a green food job virtual thing that SIFPAC puts on, which is in Chicago, which is a great place. A lot of times farmers advertise there. There's a website called Atra. I found farm jobs there in the past. And then, yeah, there's a couple Chicago places that list farm jobs in the area. So it shouldn't,
Okay.
yeah. I usually would recommend starting to look and reach out in January, if not before, for the 2024 farming season.
January. Okay, cool. Yeah, thank you. That was going to be my next question, because knowing we're going into the off season, I'm sure there's work to be done, even round the clock, all the seasons. But that was going to be my next question. Is now the time before anything is going for 2024?
I don't think you need to. I think they're more likely, in my experience, to use help that has been there. There's
Right.
generally less work to do in the winter, so I think you're fine to hold off until late winter.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you.
Noah, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I'd echo what you guys have said, but also add maybe go to your farmer's market and talk to some of the producers and ask, if they've got any use for some help. And then this sounds kind of funny, but a lot of farms have a big social media presence, and I've seen that a lot of them will actually post that they have that they have open applications on Instagram or Facebook. So maybe try to find some farms that kind of resonate with you and you could see yourself working at, and then follow them and maybe reach out. So
Awesome. Okay, cool. Yeah, that's definitely. Yeah, I guess it's like straight into the source. Yeah, just hitting them up on social media.
yeah.
Yep, absolutely. So we're almost at time, and I'd be happy to take some more questions and thoughts after this, but we have one big favor to ask. We'd love to sort of know how well we did, just sort of helping you along on your farm journey. So we're going to do 2 polls. If you could quickly respond, that would be super helpful to us. Jeannie, you want to run the first one?